com. And this week, very excited to be joined by Tim Russell of Maggie's Farm Rum in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Tim, how's it going over there today?
Pretty good. You?
I'm good. I'm excited. I've got your stills in the background. It's almost like we're there together at the distillery right now. So I know we've still got people showing up. We're gonna get started in just a minute. First, before we do, just want to go over the agenda with everyone real quick. So first of all, if you look to your right, you'll see a chat window over there. Feel free to say hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from. I see we already got people from New York, Oregon, Oakland, Virginia. So all over the place. That's awesome to see. Thanks for coming out, guys. So if you have a question at any point for Tim during the presentation, you'll see a question box at the bottom. Just drop it in there. I'll be keeping an eye on it. And at the end, we're going to save some time for Q&A. I see we've already got a couple down there, so that's great to see. And lastly, you can share the event. There's a share button at the top. So if you want to share with people on Facebook, Twitter, invite people to join us, that would be great. But yeah, with that said, Tim, I want to talk about you for a second. So you're the founder, head distiller at Maggie's Farm Rum. Or Allegheny Distilling, technically, is the name of the distillery, I believe. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on, I'm excited to talk to you today, is because I feel like every time I see something new from you, which is really often, it's always something that I find really interesting, like whether it's a production method you guys are doing, an interesting cask finish. I know you guys just did, I think, Queen's Share finished in an apple brandy cask a few months back that I'm really mad I haven't been able to try yet. You've done blended rums, liqueurs, it's just always man, I want to try that when I see it. So we're going to get into all that stuff as we, talk more about you guys. But first, for those who are less familiar with Maggie's Farm, can you bring them up to speed on who y'all are, how long you've been making rum, and how you kind of describe the rum that you guys make to people who haven't had it before?
So we'd be considered, I guess, a craft distillery in the sense of our size and production. I started the company. We were fully licensed for production in October of 2013.
Okay.
In Pittsburgh, in the Strip District of the city, which is kind of our industrial market area. So we've been making pot distilled rum since then. And exclusively rum too. So it's probably one thing that makes it a little bit different from your average craft distilleries where we're just focusing on doing rum.
Right.
But from that sort of one rum base, we do have maybe 14 different SKUs, I think. Mm-hmm. Again, we've been licensed since October of 2013, making rum, not from molasses, but actually from turbinado sugarcane.
Yeah, and we'll get it. We'll come back to that as we get into how you guys make rum and everything. I know that's something people are always curious about. I know also when you were first getting started, you kind of discovered rum along the way of opening up a distillery. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean that's back earlier in kind of the whiskey boom.
Yeah,
I was coming from more of a craft beer background, and whiskey was kind of that entryway. Thought about making whiskey, but a lot of the people were doing it. Whiskey's really hard to break into the market unless you've got some kind of big investment behind you. I know some distilleries that were able to make whiskey for 2 years and not try to sell anything.
Right.
Our first releases were already straight. We didn't have that luxury. I'd have something off the still right away. We already had a whiskey distillery that opened up maybe a year and a half before us. So they already had almost a jump on that straight whiskey, which is going to be hard to compete with. There was already a world-class vodka distillery, Boyd and Blair, a few miles away. So vodka kind of seemed out of the question. And rum, nobody was making rum at the time. So I was like, okay, I'm going to probably make some whiskey, barrel it, and then we're going to make rum, something that you can, more potable off the still, I guess you could say. Once I got into the rum and learning about rum, meeting people in the rum community, I kind of fell in love with that. Mm-hmm. And still the intention of maybe making whiskey. And to this day, I've never made a drop of whiskey.
Yeah. Well,
never had a piece of grain in the building.
I think everyone who's in attendance right now is happy that you chose to stick with rum, because as I said, y'all have done quite a bit of interesting stuff, since opening. One thing I'm always interested to talk to American rum producers about is when you first started, how did you go about figuring out what style of rum you wanted to make? Because I feel like American distillers, it's not like you have as many local reference points for how rum is supposed to be made. You can kind of like pick and choose from different styles that are out there. Like how did you go about that, and how has your style evolved over time?
It's kind of trial and error. I mean, obviously, you would start with fermenting molasses and distilling that. I didn't like what we were getting right away, though. At the time, I kind of learned about French rums, which seemed really interesting. And the idea was to keep it interesting. Again, we were coming into the market with something new, and even though we were pretty exclusive to rum where we're at in Pittsburgh, I mean, we were the first rum to be on shelves in Pennsylvania. That was made in Pennsylvania. So, we were kind of exclusive there, but as far as a broader market, we still had to kind of differentiate ourselves a little bit. The initial molasses experimentations didn't really go all that well. And I think, again, we had to come to the market. So we were coming to the market with something fresh too, like off the still. We didn't have the luxury of time or anything like that. And just playing around and actually doing these turbinado sugar fermentations, I liked a lot better what I was getting from a young new make spirit with that as opposed to the molasses. So we kind of went that direction. And there were some other factors too. I mean, it's much easier to handle as opposed to molasses, which can be just a mess. You don't need screw pumps and things like that, like you would for a molasses. Fermentations can be a lot easier. It's a little more tricky on the nutrient side because it's almost completely fermentable. But again, you're not getting your nutrients like you would from a molasses either. So that can be a little more tricky on the other side. But in a sense, it was easier to do it first as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we stuck with it mostly. In some ways, I feel a little bit pigeonholed with it. But we've had a lot of time to experiment and kind of stress things one way or the other, kind of coax more out of it. But it's definitely, now that we're getting further down the road of seeing what age results look like, it does seem to be a little bit of its own thing that also borrows from different rum genres as well, which I do still like about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of times rum enthusiasts hear, some form of crystallized sugar, raw sugar being used in fermentations, and they expect that to just kind of produce a neutral taste relative to like what you would get from a molasses. Can you speak a little to that, and just kind of like what you are able to get from that, versus what someone might get from a molasses-based rum?
I mean, you can get neutral rums from molasses. You look at Spanish style, which they're pretty neutral. It really depends how you handle the fermentation, but what the yeast are dealing with is going to give you, their own thing. I mean, molasses can vary from neutral to really fruity. When you look at French rums with cane juice, I mean, they can be a little bit on the neutral side, but usually a lot more grassy and kind of vegetal.
Yeah.
Using the turbinado, so the turbinado, it's not obviously not cane juice, it's not molasses. It kind of falls somewhere in between, I think. We eat up a little bit of the grassy character, but not really any of the vegetal character. Some of the earthy character, but not really any of the fruity character either. I notice in the purest form in our white rums, we get vanilla and a little bit of butter. What I like about that is it kind of develops into buttercream, butterscotch a little bit. When it does start to age, a little more complex than basically sort of like maybe like a straight caramel character you get from Spanish rums.
Right.
One thing I said we're not really getting is the fruity style, but I mean that's just Jamaican rum. We don't expect to get that. One thing we're still trying to do is just play with it and just coax more of those characters out of it through fermentations and aging and things like that.
Yeah. So I want to talk about kind of your production process. I'd love you to just kind of walk us through how you approach most. I know you have a couple of different, productions for different products you have out there, but just talking about kind of your base rum, what is the production process like for that? And I know we have this image in the background, but I want to make sure people can get a look at those beautiful pot stills that y'all have there as you as.
Are you still there? I just froze up for a second.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
So as far as production, everything is basically the same base spirit. We're using turbinado. If I didn't mention earlier, so the turbinado, the way that works is when cane juice is pressed from stock, it is sort of dehydrated into a cane syrup. Then it goes through about a centrifuge process, and you will see sort of your raw sugar then separate from molasses. That would actually give you your highest grade molasses, and then sort of your highest grade of raw sugar.
Okay.
And that whatever's remaining molasses, that goes through a centrifuge process. That yields a little bit of a lower grade molasses, and then maybe some more raw sugar. Eventually, with those more of the centrifuges you do on there, you get you have a blackstrap molasses, and then your sort of a lowest grade, which would be more like a white table sugar. So we're using that turbinado, which is a little bit earlier in the process. So it does still contain some of the molasses component to it. So it does still yield some more character. We are creating fermentations out of that by liquefying it. We do get it to a pasteurization temperature. So the fermentation itself starts off clean as opposed to something else that may have been carried in with the sugar on it. Our fermentation tanks, we've got 3 of them right now. They're all upright conicals, 2 1,500-gallon tanks and a 2,000-gallon tank. Okay. Depending on what we're going for, right now, our spiced rum is basically our biggest volume seller.
Okay.
And again, that's just kind of considering what the general public's consuming. We can turn that around pretty quickly, is that it's not very dependent on the character itself. It's mostly dependent on the spices. So as long as we can distill it to be as smooth as can be, do a light resting period to smooth out a little bit more, the flavor's really dependent on the spices. So we don't pay a lot of attention to that as far as fermentation, as we don't need to.
Okay.
But right now with the 3 tanks, everything's based on a 3-week cycle. We'll spend Monday through Saturday doing stripping runs and then refilling the tank, then doing the final distillations. That takes up a whole week. In the background, the other 2 tanks are fermenting. So each tank effectively gets at least 2 weeks of fermentation time, between 14 to 18 days of fermentation time, which is pretty long.
Yeah.
But again, and the fermentations don't take that long. Our fermentations are probably doing most of the primary in 4 to 5 days.
Okay.
And then after that, it's basically going sort of a secondary lactic phase. The tanks are open. They're not sealed on top. So any kind of, microflora in the distillery is getting in there. We see a lot of what seems to be acetobacter in there. So after the primary fermentation is done, the acetobacter, whatever else might get in there, and we get sort of that acid production too.
Okay.
And that tends to yield sort of a little bit of almost like a cidery character on the wash. If we're shooting for something that's going to be aged or something that is probably going to even be for a white rum, we'll actually ferment a little bit longer, at least 3 weeks. We've even tried up to like 5 weeks at that point, where it just sits and get a little bit of rotten and really funky.
Uh-huh.
And we're also starting the wash with the leftover washes from previous distillations. So say on a Wednesday, we do our last stripping run. Any of the liquid that's still in that still will get pumped over to a secondary tank, and that'll be the liquid that actually start to liquefy the next batch of raw sugar that's coming in.
Interesting. So would that be kind of similar to like using dunder?
Yeah, it's exactly what it is.
Okay.
And it's done in a sense that, again, we had that 3, 4, 5 week fermentation. It got very, very acidic.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're introducing this raw sugar in. We're repasteurizing it, so we're killing off any of the leftover bacteria that carried over from that dunder, but all the acids are still remaining in there.
Okay.
And the idea is the acid, once it gets interaction with our yeast pitch, it's going to create more esters. So hopefully that gives us a more of more character in our rum. And again, that's going to take place over that longer fermentation period too, over the whether it's 3 up to 5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And doing pod distillations on it to finish.
Yeah, so tell us about these stills that we're looking at. Are these from? Am I remembering right that they're Spanish? Is that right?
Yeah, Hoga. They're pretty basic. When I started up, there were, you could probably count the still manufacturers in the world on 2 hands, I think.
Okay.
You had your big guys, and there's Holstein and Carl in Germany, Coda in Austria, Forsyth in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
There's a French company, obviously Vendome in Kentucky, and then a few mom and pop places around the country. But especially, back then, I don't know what it's like now. The yield time, the lead times were at least a year on some of them. We were on a really shoestring budget, and these guys at Hoga in Spain were, I mean, it's just classic, handmade, family-owned company. Lead times were really good. I think 3 months was about the lead time on delivery for them, and the price was right too. No bells and whistles. I mean, everything's completely done by hand. Yeah, but they're still 100% copper. They're not really skimping on anything else. The quality has been great.
And are they direct fire or is it steam?
The smaller one, which is 400 liter, that is direct fire.
Okay, that's the one with like the bricks built around the bottom, right?
There's a firebox we have built in there. The larger one, we're a little bit limited in the space in the building. We don't have room for a real true boiler system. So we're actually using electrically heated hot oil to go through that one.
Okay.
The direct fires, I mean, it's nice. We'll still use it for certain things now, but more in smaller batches. As far as efficiency and things like that, we have to kind of just go with the bigger one on our little oil heater. Got
it. So one of the types of rum I think you guys are known for are your Queen Share rums. You're one of the only a handful of producers making that style of rum right now. People are also really familiar with Privateer's Queen Share as well, and I think there's maybe 1 or 2 distilleries I've seen that are trying their hand at it as well. Can you walk people through the differences between producing a Queen Share rum versus a typical rum expression, and also just what made you want to explore that style in the first place? I'll just put up a picture of one of your bottles of Queen Share right there.
So when I was getting into rum production originally before we had opened, I had taken some courses. I think in one instance it was through ADI, and it was actual like a 2-day intensive on rum. Eric Watson, who I don't know where he's at now. I haven't talked to him in a long time, but last I know he was the master distiller at Grand Cayman Spirits. They make 7 Fathoms rum. He's also a consultant that kind of travels around the world with doing beer and rum specifically. Even though he's the master distiller in Grand Cayman, he actually lives in Bridgeport, West Virginia. I think he spends more time just down there, maybe like monthly as QC. But the fact that he was kind of in Bridgeport. So I took the courses with him through ADI. I think that was at the convention in Louisville, which would have been probably about 9 years ago now, maybe 10. Afterwards, I hired him on as a consultant to kind of just do a first couple of runs with us. And he had mentioned the Queen Share thing to me initially.
Okay.
The story I had gotten, it's really vague. I don't know. I've literally not found anything written about it anywhere. Maggie Campbell, who's been doing it at Privateer, she might have a little more information on it. But I think even our sources we heard from were different. Eric Watson told me they had done, at another distillery he had worked at, they had done some Queen Share, but it was a really exclusive thing.
Okay.
If you don't know what Queen Share is, basically you're taking all of your late tail runnings from your normal distillation. So these are the things that you would normally recycle by throwing into the next batch. Depending on what we're making, if it is like a white rum, we will keep some tails to throw into that as to be recycled. But if it's something like spice rum, which again, it's really not super dependent on the distillation process, we'll keep all the tails from that. Probably about once a month, usually at the end of the month, it's kind of clean up on our reporting, we'll redistill all those tails at once. Okay. The idea is those tails are more concentrated in your flavor and aroma compounds. Early in the distillation process, you're mostly just getting your lighter components, which are going to be the ethanol. The flavor aroma compounds, so oils, fatty acids are a little bit heavier, so they have a higher boiling point. They come off with a higher concentration at the end. We're going to keep those exclusively, do distillation of just those, because there's still ethanol in there. It's usually just a smaller yield, and a lot of times it's so concentrated in these really heavy oils that on its own it's not going to taste great.
Okay.
We're going to do a distillation of just the tails, and what we're going to do is we're going to reconcentrate the ethanol that was in there to get another finished rum, but it's going to bring over a lot more flavor and aroma with it as opposed to a normal distillation. Again, because there's more character in it to begin with. And that's going to be our Queen Share. Talking to Eric, he had said, they had done this as an exclusive thing. Like they did it once a year, and it was a gift just to the employees. It wasn't really being sold.
Oh, interesting.
He learned it from, I think it was a Jamaican estate distiller. And then that guy learned from another estate distiller before him. But that's pretty much as much details I've ever gotten from it.
And actually, Maggie Campbell, who we mentioned, she's watching now in the chat. She said
Yeah,
we
she
have.
can correct me on anything. So anything I say, Maggie, just yell at me.
No, she's,
Correct,
she's
please.
she's adding to what you're saying, so
Okay.
not correcting. I think she says we have some written records. I'll try to get it scanned and over to you. We started in 2011 from those documents, but learned more word of mouth after while visiting distillers and distillery lab folks in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
So yeah, it sounds like there's definitely some a Caribbean connection there.
Yeah, even like I'd ask people about it, and no one seemed to. The people I knew, anyways, that I asked about, no one had ever really heard of it. So
Right.
it's been fun and interesting to do. It's nice other people were doing it. I talked to Maggie about doing it since years ago, and we always talked about it's not something we were gonna should be exclusive. Like anybody can do it. We were just hoping people would follow the rules and do it that way.
Uh-huh. Yeah, she said you're amazing. Go Tim. By the way.
A few different ways. So the idea is, again, you're getting a rum that it's got a lot more body, more flavor, more aroma, but it's also really smoother because the fact it's going through a third distillation is so much farther removed from those initial heads.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll still do a heads cut on it. It's going to be very slim, but we're still going to do a
Okay.
heads cut on it, and it just yields, it's this really special spirit. Initially, we're doing it kind of like an unaged overproof. We started aging some of it. It's one thing we'll have fun with. I'll definitely do a lot of different cask finishes with it.
Yeah.
So pretty much every one we've done has been a different cask finish. We've done bourbon barrel. We've done rye. The rye barrels were a favorite. The best we've done is probably our double barrel finishes, especially the more recent ones.
Okay.
Like you said earlier, I've done most recent we did the apple brandy cask.
That was from Catoctin Creek, right?
So yeah, we did a barrel trade with Catoctin Creek. So they'd done a rye in one of our rum barrels, and then we did a Queen Share in one of their brandy barrels.